Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined with Matt Taylor, who's a world champion powerlifter and the founder of StrongerYou Personal Training. Matt, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Dan. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Looking forward to the conversation. Before we get started, though, just introduce yourself in your own words. Who is Matt today?
Who is Matt today? So today I am a powerlifting coach. I've been coaching for a little over a decade now, and I work with a few other coaches under the StrongerYou Personal Training brand. Primarily, who we coach are just lifters who've been lifting for a couple of years. They're interested in discovering the sport of powerlifting and finding, how transformative that can be for them. And for myself, just honestly, I'm still a lifter, just as I have been for the last 16 years, and turning a passion into a career has been kind of one of the most fun things I've done so far.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, when you can turn a passion into a vocation, that's a wonderful thing. I mean, I tell people all the time before we started traveling. I mean, I was blessed for 30 years to be able to do something that I absolutely loved doing, and I think that's so important nowadays to be able to, find your thing, find that thing that drives you, find that thing that you know, kind of helps you describe your why. So too many people talk about, being in careers that they hate and they don't enjoy and it just bleeds the life out of them. And I just think that's it's a sad way to go through life to be in a career that you don't love and you don't enjoy. So, kudos to you for being able to find your passion and turn it into a vocation, and certainly wish you the best moving forward. But tell me a little bit about, how your own powerlifting journey began and how what was it that exposed you to the sport and what was it that made you, fall in love with it and really, turn it into a passion.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the best place to start. So historically I was just not good at sports as a kid. I never really had the athletic gift, we'll say. Not to say that that's the only reason somebody would be successful in a sport, but it just wasn't really something that ever gelled with me, and not for lack of effort. I tried baseball, I tried soccer, judo, the whole run-of-the-mill hockey for a while, and just never got the ball, always got picked last for teams, all that kind of stuff. And effectively, one day I had come home from gym class, just no specific sport. And the gym teacher told me, you know what, like, clearly you're not in the best shape of your life right now. And I know some other stuff. I kind of stopped listening. I was pissed. To be perfectly frank, I was like, you know what? I've been busting my butt. My parents got this elliptical cardio machine, and I've been using it. And I was just kind of enjoying, like, oh, well, I went at incline X last time, and well, did a little more, and then went at incline X plus one the next time, and it was kind of cool to see some progression in this like trivial thing, but it was something I was doing with my body that I was progressing in, which was kind of the first time that it happened. And anyways, all mad coming home, I Google, as you would as a teenager, with what is the most whiplash reaction I can create. And I started lifting, and I Googled, how to lift weights, how to gain muscle, get jacked. And I didn't really like the muscle gain physique focus side of things. Just wasn't really what gelled with me, but I loved the progression. Similar to that cardio thing, the numbers was really cool. And I was very much in control of that. And I mean, fast forward 16 years and here we are. There's a whole lot of in between there, but that was what got me interested, is the numbers and the 100% personal accountability for my own progression.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And you're a guy that power lifts competitively, but it's really more so a battle against yourself more so than your competitors. I mean, your competitors are there, and yeah, there's awards and prizes at the end, but the ultimate battle is, you know, really you just kind of pushing yourself to be the best that you can be. And if that happens to be better than everybody else, you know, so be it. So what, what is it that, is kind of in your DNA that drives you to, constantly be looking to improve yourself and looking to, beat you first and foremost, and then however that ranks you know, is just the way it is.
It's a good question. I think it stems from a couple of things. One is my dad is a serial entrepreneur. Like, he's always very much been the, I don't really want to work for somebody else. I'm going to find a way to make it work. I'm always going to look for what's that next thing? What's that next thing? How do I do more and improve? And that coupled with there's a Japanese concept called Kaizen. I'm not sure if you ever heard of it before.
No, no.
So it's I think Toyota actually uses it as one of their core principles, one of their pillars within their company. But it basically is there's a few ways to translate it, but effectively continuous improvement is the principle. And it's how they refine and they've become one of the best auto manufacturers in the world. They didn't develop the principle, but it's probably one of the most popular examples of it. And for me, it's the appeal with lifting is that I can go in and I can have any external factor happen. I can have the best day, I can have the worst day. It doesn't matter to me, but I'm in charge of this thing that's about me, for me, by me, and I'm the only person that's going to change the results, and I can push for more. And having that area where I can do that in my life allows me to meet everything else where it's at. And I think, 16 years of thinking about this, but that's where I've settled on with lifting. Um, why I really like the progression there, because then I can go and uh, I can just go bowling with my friends and I can just go have a good time. I don't have to make it about crushing everybody and ruining everyone's fun. I can just go enjoy some time with my friends in some non-competitive area. And that, need to be competitive and push for more can be satisfied by the one thing, and I can go live the rest of my life and enjoy it, as opposed to trying to square peg round hole competitiveness into a bunch of other areas.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it's a great metaphor for life, because if we all just strive to be the best that we can be today, everything else falls into place. And I think too many times we get caught up in what others are doing, and that competition where if you really just compete against yourself and, you know, try to go at every day to be the best person that you can be each day, everything else falls in line. I mean, I was a big proponent of teaching life lessons through sports when I coached, and that was the one thing that I preached all the time is that, if you're on your game and if you just keep working on being the best, shortstop that you can be, or the best hitter that you can be, or the best pitcher, or whatever that is that you can be, and kind of turn all the other noise off, um, everything else falls into place. So, tell me a little bit about how you use that same mindset in life, how it translates to, you know, life outside of the gym.
Yeah, I really like the point you made there with turning the noise off. Because for me, I've got a very busy mind, we'll put it that way. And lifting for me has been that ability to just go in, turn everything else off, focus on the task at hand. Because if you don't, there's a lot of bad things that can happen. But then taking that outside of the gym, for me, especially the pursuit of strength and powerlifting with how all consuming it can be, in that the behaviors that will make you successful in powerlifting outside of purely the lifting side of things, sleeping well, eating well, managing your stress, controlling what you can control and not controlling what you can't, are all things that are probably going to be, and for me have been very useful at just leading a very successful, happy, fulfilling life at I don't want to say stress-free because that's unrealistic, but a normal amount of stress where you can manage things. The other thing with lifting that I found is with how big of a pursuit it is. Like I had no idea when I started lifting 16, 17 years ago, whatever it was, that I was going to keep doing it for this long and this is the direction I would go. But I can make it the hardest thing I do all day. I can make it the hardest thing I do all month. And so it sounds a little tacky, but having that be the hardest thing and controlling that makes everything else, relatively speaking, easier. And I can go have the worst day and get my butt kicked at work and deal with some huge problems and deal with stressors and all these external factors and just roll with the punches, because like it's just not that big of a deal, because I know just how hard my session was, that the evening prior when I was pushing through those last 2 reps on a squat.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. So, what was it that made you want to get into coaching and helping others, with their own, powerlifting journey? I mean, it's one thing to be out there and competing and doing it for yourself, but coaching is a whole different philosophy from competing. And a lot of times, at least in, with my experience in the, going back to my baseball world, um, guys who were the best players themselves don't always equate to being the best coaches because some things came very easy to them if they were very naturally gifted. And it's tough for them to work with a player who's struggling on some things that came very easy to them. So, what made you want to get into the coaching component of it?
What made me want to get into it was not learning my lesson the first time I tried to turn my passion into a career. Why I stayed is a different answer. I used to cook professionally uh, before I coached, and that was a big fiery mess of a 3 year career cycle where I just decided this is not for me. But I don't learn lessons the first time always. Luckily, this one worked out. What's made me really stay with coaching is the first couple years of lifting. I think similar to most sports, are very easy in the relative sense. You can show up and the progress is almost guaranteed. And that can ignite a lot of interest and passion in whatever the activity may be. After that, though, let's say years 3 through 6, I had, it was just setback after setback after setback to the point where 10 years later, I had training cycles where I made more progress than I made in those few years there. And upon reflection, what's kept me in the career is, I'm not going to say 100%, but the large majority of those setbacks were very preventable had I known what I was doing or worked with somebody who was more qualified than who I was working with at that point. And I look at, I'm very stubborn. I stuck with it because I figured, okay, there's got to be a solution. I'll find it, even if it is the hard way. But I saw a lot of lifters where they loved what lifting did for them and they loved the progression and they got a lot of the same fulfillment that I got from lifting, but they would quit because of those setbacks. They would get injured. They would feel a big plateau and they'd lose interest in their training. They would not be able to find how they could fit lifting within the confines of the rest of their life and everything going on outside the gym because it felt like they had to put 15 hours a week in instead of, really more like 4 or 5 that they actually need to progress. And I figured, well, if I can help people get this thing that is so helpful to me in my life and it seems to be for them and help them stick with that long term and really play the long game with the pursuit of strength and all the benefits that come with it, it would be ignorant of me to not try to help people with that. And that was the real difference for me with cooking versus coaching. Cooking, I got an order, cooked it. I was very proud of the food I was making. Every now and then you get some nice reviews or somebody comes back in the kitchen, compliments to the chef. But there's no consistent way to really see the end product on how what you're doing helps people. Whereas with coaching, it's very direct. I'm working one-on-one with people and I can see, all right, well, we made these changes. Here's how this has changed your lifting, changed everything outside of your lifting. And the result was more direct and more apparent to me. And that just feeling of being helpful that's why I'm still here.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about your dad. Tell me a little bit about, seeing his entrepreneurial spirit um, has helped in your own entrepreneurial journey.
I think I get a lot of my work ethic from him in that I don't count how many hours I work. Some days are shorter, some days are longer. But in growing up, he had an office he would work at, rented out some office space to run his business from. And I'd say most days he brought work home with him. I have this thing, I need to get it done. It needs to be done by this deadline. I'm going to make it happen. To me, that's, instead of clocking in and clocking out, and just from a culture standpoint, I think if you work a 9 to 5 and you work for somebody else, it's not better or worse or wrong or right to have that, but that's just what that job is. If you're an hourly employee or you're salaried and you have X tasks to do. I think the entrepreneurial spirit is very different though, in the sense that, all right, well, I need to juggle 55 different things, right? I'm probably going to be very bored if I'm juggling any less than that. And I just need to get everything done. And here's my deadlines. And so it doesn't really matter how long it takes me to do it. I need it done by this date. And if you don't, it's sink or swim, right? So from a culture standpoint, just I think subliminally, it led to me thinking about things more in a did I do the thing, yes or no, as opposed to how long did I spend on this, or is this going to be hard, or whatever it may be. And I've actually tried putting things on maintenance. With my lifting, I've tried putting things on maintenance with the business and like not having this big thing in my life that kind of scares me, where I'm like, I don't really know 100% if I can do this. And very routinely, it feels great for a couple of weeks, kind of like going on vacation. And then like week 3, the 1 month mark rolls around, and I'm finding myself like my anxiety is through the roof. I feel stagnant. I'm doing all kinds of dumb stuff. Like I just feel like I'm drinking more coffee than usual to feel stimulated, or I'm like oversleeping, or my motivation for my workouts drops off. Like it's just starts bleeding across all the areas of my life. And I almost need to have, and very much so with my dad, I've talked with him about this, like you need to have that huge, scary task always looming over you. And not necessarily in a bad way, but you need that thing where like, this is the big project I'm working on right now. And feeling like there's always room to kind of keep pushing that glass ceiling upwards, whether it's from raising your foundation or from just pushing harder on a top end performance thing. That I think has been the really fundamental difference in how I might approach my day to day versus some of the other people I talk with who might not be entrepreneurs.
Right. So, I know a lot of times there's a fine line between being an entrepreneur and being a workaholic, because you get so immersed in, the work that you're doing because, it is doing work that matters. Um, how do you find that? And I hate to use the term balance because I think when people talk about balance, they think that it's equal, but it's not. I think it's a um, fluid concept for sure, where some days there's going to be more of a workload, less of a, you know, leisure load or personal load, so to speak. So, how do you, um, you know, work with that without, you know, burning yourself out or, um, you know, really not allowing time to reset and time for yourself?
Yeah. I think the best way I've ever heard it put, these are not my words, but I need to remember where I heard them, is work-life integration, where they both fit as opposed to it being a balance of the two at 50-50, because if you're running your own business, it's just not how it's going to go.
Right.
Where I've found that integration is frankly a lesson I learned from training, in that you're going to have periods where you focus more on, very high importance work. Your focus and your time shifts more towards that. The workload is higher, right? And if you look at a training cycle, that might be, closer to a competition or a very important date. And then I'll have periods where I deliberately will pull back, if for no other reason than to act as a reset, not necessarily to move the needle forward, but to kind of have me ready for that next big push, big project, big thing that I'm working on. Because yeah, you're very much correct that the burnout can come on very quickly and take a while to go away if you're not conscious of it. And then suddenly you're working hard, but it's not leading to much.
Yeah.
And then you start to hate it. And then you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if you get rid of it, you hate that. But if you keep doing what you're doing, you also hate that. Right.
Yeah.
So for me, having a phasic structure and trying to set, this took me a long time to approach with the business. And in that when you start your own business, it's very easy to just kind of have your own job as opposed to treating it like a business, but approaching it in like, all right, January 2nd in 2025, I know I'm sitting down and I have the day blocked off. I'm out of office and I'm just going to sit down and say, okay, what do I want to do with the business this year? Where does that break down into my quarterly and monthly and weekly projections? And what are the timelines for all that? And that's something I do with my training. But taking that parallel and putting into the business was something that took me a lot longer, because you can kind of live in that middle zone of just having a job that keeps you really busy. And that can feel normal until you look at it the other way and like, oh, it's actually so much smoother, and I can attack those periods of lots of work and high intensity if I plan and periodize my work schedule and my projects intelligently, or
Yeah.
with some thought at least.
I love it. I love it. So what's one of the greatest lessons you've learned in the gym that you've been able to parlay directly into your business model, your entrepreneur journey?
At a like business structure sense or how I coach people or
Yeah, just business structure sense, probably more so than anything.
yeah, I think very much it's that structure that I was just talking about where there's a point early on where working harder is going to correlate one to one with you getting further ahead. And then there's a point where you can't just do more of the same thing and you need to be more strategic with instead of, max out all the time, you got to have some periods of more medium and more light in there and just picking, okay, strategically, when do I go for each? Because I can't just go heavy session and then do another heavy session, then do another heavy session because it's just kind of going to get worse.
Right.
So I need to go, all right, heavy recovery. Let's pick the next big project, push on the next set of goals and deadlines, and then recover, back off a little bit, or shift gears and focus on something adjacent
Yeah.
and come back to it. But you can't do that unless you have the big picture where you can then break it down into more bite-sized pieces.
Right. Right. Makes a lot of sense for sure. So people that are coming to you for coaching and powerlifting, are they do you have everything from, absolute beginners never picked up a weight in their life to very seasoned veterans, or what does that kind of scope look like as far as your clients coming to you for coaching?
Yeah. So I would say as a company, we don't really work with a lot of people. There's outliers, but 95% of the people we work with are not on either end of that spectrum, where it's not their first time lifting and they're not winning championships just yet, right? Most of the times, I'd say the earlier end of the spectrum are lifters or just people who've been, lifting for a while. They've got a bit of experience, a year or two even, with some barbell training and they're doing some squats, some bench presses, some deadlifts, but they're finding, okay, there's some issues I'm having. I'm not recovering as fast as I used to. Maybe there's a plateau. Maybe there's an injury. Maybe they're just finding it slowing down a bit and they really want to see, well, okay, now that I want to start competing, how do I level up? Right. A lot of the times within that side of the spectrum, which I'd say is probably 70% of the people we work with, they're not necessarily interested in competing very seriously because there's this feeling that, well, they just don't have the time. Right. I'm 33. I don't have 10 hours a week to lift, or, I'm lifting 3 days a week right now. I spend 60 to 75 minutes at a time in the gym. There's no way I can go compete, right, against these people who are doing 15 hours a week in the gym. And a lot of what we do is show, hey, you know what? If you're actually training intelligently and not just doing the shotgun approach where you say, let's try everything right now, you can, in fact, progress and make great gains on your training and find at least move towards the strongest version of yourself with less than 5 hours a week in the gym and still go be a good father and show up with energy to work and sleep and eat and have family time and hang out with your friends and do all those things that will make you whole. On the
So,
upper end of the spectrum, go
oh,
ahead.
no, go ahead, finish.
Yeah. Yeah. On the upper end of the spectrum, yeah, definitely we'll work with some lifters who've got a couple of meets under their belt. Maybe they've been competing for a couple of years at this point. And the process with them is generally a bit different in that they've already found how does this fit into my life? And they need a little bit more of the nuts and bolts around like mindset coaching within the sport, properly periodized training, managing the recovery, those types of things. So it's a little bit more conventional coaching, I suppose, in that sense.
Yeah. So are all of your clients coming to you with the goal to get involved into competitive lifting, or are there some that are just, again, lifting to push themselves to, their own limit and not necessarily with a vision of competing in the future?
Yeah, definitely. Like I wouldn't say everybody competes, nor does everybody have the goal to compete. But I think the driver in the back of everybody's mind is very much the same in that lifting is in some way, shape, or form an athletic pursuit for them. And it's a way for them to explore finding the strongest version of themselves, quite literally,
Yeah.
but there's the figurative side of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, whether that's on the platform in an official sanctioned competition setting or simply 6 months later, you're going to go test your new maxes and find, all right, how much have they gone up? There's I've got a better way to explain it. I have one of my best friends. I've been coaching him since I started in 2014. So his name's Chad. And I asked him a while ago, I'm like, look, man, you've been lifting for a decade. You've been competing for around that as well, or a little over a decade, competing for around a decade now. Why are you still here? You're stronger than most of the people you know. And not to talk him out of it, but I was just genuinely curious. Like the gains are harder to come by now. You know, statistically, you're stronger than almost everybody you're going to walk by on the street.
Right.
You know, your goal, I know, is not to be like you could win a competition or lose, and you probably wouldn't really care. That's not where your motivation is. Why are you here? And for him, very similar to myself, you know, he's didn't have a big athletic background. And lifting for him was that, you know, first moment that he felt, oh, you know, very similar to the comic books he read growing up. Deadlifting 500 pounds is gives him a little bit of that like superhero feeling of, you know, when they're throwing cars across the city and doing all kinds of crazy stuff and these huge feats of strength and superpowers, that deadlift feels like that to him. And having that feeling of power is what keeps him coming back.
Yeah. Interesting. So want to kind of shift a little bit here. You mentioned that you were cooking and then got into the powerlifting coaching. But you were still lifting while you were cooking. So was there was there a specific event that took place that made you want to get out of the cooking world and go, full time into the lifting, or, what was it that triggered that? It seems like a uh an odd road, so to speak, an
Yeah.
odd path to get you to into powerlift
Yeah,
coaching.
it's definitely not a, oh, well, the obvious next step would be. So around '08 is when I got into lifting, and a little bit before that, I had gotten very interested in cooking, um, just as something to do. It was cool. I kind of stumbled into it, and I thought it was really fun. And keep in mind, this is sort of the era where Food Network was very big, celebrity chefs were very big. There's this dream subtext of like you can make it as a big time chef and open your own restaurant. And there were some of the, I think Gordon Ramsay is probably the most accessible example of this, right? TV shows, he's got his own restaurants in Vegas, like all these things. I had big dreams like this. And I'm like, oh, I could start my own restaurant. I had this huge passion for food. I see how happy it makes people when I cook for my friends and my family. Like this is super cool. And it and the same was lifting with something athletic. I am not a very artistic guy. And I still think cooking is probably one of the only artistic things that I can pull off right now. But for me, it was like, hey, there's just an artistic thing that I can do that I really enjoy. And the service industry as a whole, but particularly with cooking, particularly with fine dining, is there's not a lot of money in it at the staff level. Even as a restaurateur, there's not a lot of money in it. And my goal of, okay, opening my own restaurant and all this, I pretty much just came, you know, to a really realization one day. I'm making after tax $2,000 a month, something like that. I'm living at home with my parents, you know, as you would at 17, 18. But I'm like, well, the moment I have to pay for anything, I'm at negative money right now. I'm working in one of the best restaurants in the city, and this is where I'm at financially. How the heck am I supposed to open my own restaurant? And at that point, how does that even work? If this is where I'm at, I'm already cooking at a relatively high level. And I just sort of looked at it and I was like, well, this feels really futile, and kind of checked out to make a long story short there.
Gotcha. And then was it easy to decide, well, I've got this other passion, I'm going to turn that into my vocation, or was there a step in between there before you started the full-time coaching? Or was there a point where you were doing some coaching and still cooking at the same time? Like just how that, was there an overlap? How'd the transition take place?
So there wasn't any overlap. Mostly because when I was cooking, I was doing a lot of 80, 90 plus hour weeks, and you kind of sleep 3 hours a night. Sometimes I'd be able to wake up with my alarm, go lift. And by the time you do that, you're kind of just back at work again. Like I had no time for a social life or anything like that. But I took about a September, October, November, December, is 7, 8 months gap between when I finished cooking and when I started coaching. And in that time, obviously had a lot more time available to me. Still lifting, really just enjoying the process. Obviously having an extra 80 or 90 hours in your week opens up a whole realm of possibilities for what you can do with your day. And so I've gotten back into lifting with some of my friends again, reconnected with some old gym partners. And what I found I really loved on top of just going and lifting and having a great session with them was finding, hey, as you might do with a gym partner or somebody who's on the same team as you if you're playing baseball, if they're receptive to it, you might say, hey, I noticed this thing you're doing. Have you ever tried doing this other way? This is what I found to be personally really beneficial. And that's where that initial spark for coaching came from, is seeing, hey, I can actually provide some insights. It was self-validating and to a degree, and just seeing, okay, yeah, I am knowledgeable about this enough. I have obsessed enough about learning about lifting and troubleshooting that I can make suggestions that are going to positively impact some people. And seeing that, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I can get certified to be a personal trainer in a fairly short amount of time. Let's do that. And then I had my certification for a little bit. I didn't really do much with it and moved out to Vancouver. So I lived in Toronto at the time, moved across the country to the West Coast. And I had lined up a job interview to be a personal trainer here and just sort of said, all right, fresh start. I've got all the certifications I need. I have 6 years of background and personal experience with this as well, which personally I think served me a lot better than a certification telling me where the bones are in my leg. And that's kind of how I started. And then I just jumped, head first.
Yeah, I love it. So what is one of the most gratifying things for you in coaching?
Ooh. It's a big question. At a 30,000 foot view, it's very simply being able to help somebody proceed past the point and explore and find a new version of themselves that they thought they could never get to, whether it was because of purely self-limiting beliefs or obstacles they'd faced. At a more specific example, what I see a lot with powerlifting is twofold, right? One is that feeling that you have to choose, right? Like I had mentioned with the whole time example of, okay, well, I have kids, I have a family, I have a relationship that I want to be present in, and my partner doesn't lift and isn't going to spend 15 hours a week at the gym with me. Um, and helping them find, okay, well, here's how you can actually integrate your passion and get that and have your cake and eat it too. But then the other thing past the process level is, injuries happen, as I experienced when I started lifting, as many of the people, especially earlier in my career, experienced. That's where we started working together, where I have one lifter that we worked with, and she had some very long-standing back issues that weren't actually from lifting, but they really impacted her lifting, where she just could kind of maintain but couldn't really progress. Very interested in seeing, okay, well, could I still fix this? And fast forward a couple of years of rehab and programming and finding that sweet spot for admittedly what is a very unconventional program for her. I look at the blocks I write her and I'm like, I'm not doing that one. This one's all for you. And she podiumed on her first nationals actually in 2023 and set a national bench record. And seeing just the complete, like, can't do it right now to being on top was just a complete reversal. And it's just very cool to me seeing that total transformation and potential.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I kind of feel the same way as you do when I was coaching. It's to see the ones who didn't necessarily um, know what they had in them, but you as a coach could see, what that potential was and be able to, help them find it is definitely one of the most gratifying things for sure. So I absolutely love that. Um, Matt, we covered a whole lot of different things, but is there anything that we missed that you think would be valuable to the listeners before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I've got one thought with this. So there's a hill that I'll die on, in that if you're going to call yourself a power lifter, you should compete. You should be competing. You can't. You're not a boxer until you step in the ring. Same idea. But you can totally train for powerlifting and explore the things that you love about the sport of powerlifting with or without competing. And so the statement of, okay, powerlifter, powerlifting, blah, 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 I don't think it's all that relevant. More that if it's something that you really find a lot of joy in, and the barbell has been a means for you to just explore your potential and it provides you a lot of joy, look a little bit deeper on how you can fit that in and try to find how can I make it fit as opposed to looking at it from the lens of like, well, I can't really do this because I need to pick between A and B. And often it involves compromise. You know, could you do more with twice as much time? Yeah, sure. But that's also not really realistic. So try to look at it more from the lens of like, how can I make it fit and what's the best I can do given what I've got and what I can change, as opposed to just saying, well, if and all these hypotheticals that aren't going to really apply unless you break up with your partner and, you know, get rid of your kids and quit your job and do all those things that hopefully aren't on the chopping block.
Right. Right. I love it. So, Matt, that brings us to our final question. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of the Michael Franti song Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So it's one of the little things that you do on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place.
One of the things that I do as much as I can, I don't know if it's necessarily every single day, is I just take time for myself. I'm very aware that I'm an extremely introverted person and my job involves interacting with a lot of people at a lot of different levels. So I make sure every day to have a little bit of time where I don't talk to anybody. I don't listen to music. I just sort of embrace the stillness, if you will. Could be 30 seconds of just stepping outside in the morning, look at the weather, whatever it is, but just consciously acknowledging that so that I can show up to everything else with just a little bit more centeredness. To me, that's the best, most consistent thing that I do, because then I can provide my best self everywhere else that I show up.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's very important. Whether you're an introvert or not, I think taking time for yourself is just such an important part of our journey in life. So I love that answer. For folks out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com. While you're there, check out my Pay It Forward program where you can pick up a copy of one of my books, and Sandy and I will donate it to somebody along our travels. And Matt, again, thank you so much for taking the time. This is an absolutely great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate it.
You bet.